Montgomery Clift was a 4-time Academy Award-nominated actor, best remembered for his roles in films like I Confess, From Here to Eternity, Red River, and Judgment at Nuremberg. Along with James Dean and Marlon Brando, he was one of the original method actors in Hollywood. He was known for being incredibly attractive, but the trajectory of his life was as tragic as that of any of the roles he played. Facts Verse presents the unspoken truth of Montgomery Clift. Clift's journey from Omaha to Hollywood. Edward Montgomery Clift was born October 17, 1920, in Omaha, Nebraska. His father, William Brooks Clift, was the vice president of Omaha National Trust Company, while his mother, Ethel Fogg Sonny Clift, was your typical American homemaker. Clift had a brother named William Brooks Clift Jr., as well as a twin sister, Ethel, who ended up surviving him by 48 years. Clift's father made a lot of money in banking, but was quite poor during the Great Depression, and spent most of her life, as well as her family's wealth, raising her children as aristocrats, while reconnecting with her illustrious Southern lineage. When he was 13, Clift appeared on Broadway in the production Fly Away Home. For the next 10 years, he chose to remain in the New York theater scene before ultimately succumbing to Hollywood. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to Facts Verse if you haven't already. And stay tuned to find out how Montgomery Clift's tragic story came to an end. Clift was painted by the tabloids as a reclusive weirdo. Right out of the gate, Clift was framed as being a rebellious individual. When he first showed up in Hollywood, he refused to sign a contract until after the success of his first 2 films. He then negotiated a 3-picture deal with Paramount that gave him absolute discretion over the projects he wanted to be involved in. It was a deal basically unheard of at the time, especially for such a young actor. But if Paramount wanted to have him under their banner, they had to give him everything he wanted. This dynamic set a precedent that continued to structure the star-studio relationship for the next 4 decades. Whenever the press mentioned Clift, they would talk about his talent and beauty, but also they would touch on how peculiar and offbeat of a man he was. He wasn't your typical movie star. He insisted upon living in New York and spending as little time as possible in Hollywood. His apartment, which he only paid $10 a month to rent, was described by his friends as beat up, but he often referred to it as terrific. Clift's diet was also interesting, as he only ate 2 meals a day, consisting mostly of steak, eggs, and orange juice. He didn't care about clubbing. Instead, he preferred to spend his time reading historical and economic literature, as well as the works of Chekhov and Aristotle. When he wasn't reading or preparing for a part, he enjoyed going to the local night court, where he attended high-profile court cases to observe the humanity that was publicly on display. He didn't care for the fancy things. Clift cared very little about making appearances or wearing the latest fashion trends, leading the Los Angeles Times to once refer to him as the rumpled movie idol. He famously owned just 1 suit, and when he paid a visit to renowned fan magazine author Elsa Maxwell's home, she had her help mend the elbow of his jacket. Clift's rundown car was 10 years old, and his best friends all had nothing to do with the movie business. It was clear he was as much a Hollywood outsider as an insider, and he described himself as a, quote, ordinary second-class wolf. Anecdotes like these would establish Clift, along with Marlon Brando, as the embodiment of the 1950s youth culture, resisting conformity and all the things that post-World War II Americans were expected to embrace. Even so, Clift eventually came to despise this image that put him in a little box. After the Saturday Evening Post ran their story about his bare closet, he worked tirelessly to set the record straight, highlighting the many ways that the media likes to take a kernel of truth and inflate it into something like a legend. He came to understand the majority of writers didn't actually have to interview him to write a story about him because, for the most part, all their stories were written beforehand. Facts didn't matter nearly as much as sensationalism, and Clift knew that all too well. The world wanted to know who the real Montgomery Clift was. Clift's private life wasn't all that exciting. He didn't date, nor did he flirt, and he was rarely ever seen hanging out in public. His image was perplexing and didn't fit into any of Tinseltown's established star categories. But he was handsome and charismatic on screen, which only fueled the public's desire to figure him out. Clift's seemingly ambiguous sexuality had inspired much speculation within the industry community for years. His closeted homosexuality would in turn become the primary source of his deepest pain throughout his life. In 1949, Clift signed on for the film The Heiress alongside actress Olivia de Havilland. The studio tried to market Clift as a sex symbol before the film's release, but when de Havilland's character rejected Clift's character in the movie's final scene, she was flooded with angry fan letters. Clift ended up being pretty unhappy with his performance in that film as well and left early during the film's premiere. Russian-born actress Mira Rostova was initially rumored to be his romantic interest, but later she was known to be his confidant, advisor, and acting coach. Another one of his closest female friends was Elizabeth Taylor. Clift and Taylor's friendship blossomed during the filming of 1951's A Place in the Sun. The two stars had such undeniable chemistry in that film that the rumor started going around that he and Taylor were romantically involved, but of course they weren't. The car accident that changed everything. On May 12, 1956, while he was filming Raintree County, Clift was involved in a serious car accident when he fell asleep at the wheel and crashed his vehicle into a telephone pole minutes after leaving a dinner party at the Beverly Hills home of his friend Elizabeth Taylor. Taylor rushed to his side immediately after hearing about the collision. Clift ended up suffering a broken jaw and nose, a fractured sinus, and several facial lacerations that required plastic surgery. After spending 2 months in recovery, Clift returned to the set to finish shooting. As he had correctly predicted, the film ended up doing quite well, as moviegoers flocked to theaters to see the difference in his facial appearance after the accident. Clift was left with constant pain after the crash, and besides that, he was still languishing in his guilt over his homosexuality. All of this led him to turn to alcohol and pills for relief. Eventually, his health and physical appearance deteriorated until his death. With his Hollywood career in an irreversible freefall, despite giving an occasional powerful performance, like in Stanley Kramer's Judgment in Nuremberg in 1951, Clift returned to New York, where he attempted to develop a somewhat more normal lifestyle in his brownstone row house on East 61st Street in Manhattan. Montgomery Clift's death. On July 22, 1966, Clift spent the majority of the day in his bedroom. He and his private nurse, Lorenzo James, hadn't spoken much all day. But around 1 a.m., James went up to say goodnight to Clift, who was still awake and sitting up in his bed. He inquired if Clift needed anything, but he politely refused before telling James he planned on staying up for a while, either reading a book or watching TV. The Misfits was on TV, and James asked Clift if he wanted to watch it with him. Clift replied with a firm and resolute no. That was the last time he spoke to anyone. James went to his own bedroom to sleep without saying anything else, and at 6:30 a.m. he went to wake Clift but found the bedroom door was locked. James knocked, but Clift did not respond. James ran down to the back garden and climbed up a ladder so he could enter through the second-floor bedroom window. Once outside, he found Clift dead. He was naked, lying in his bathtub with his glasses still on and both fists clenched by his side. The ensuing autopsy report cited the cause of his death as a heart attack brought on by occlusive coronary artery disease, but it's also fairly likely his drug and alcohol abuse played a part in his physical decline. He was 45 years old at the time of his death. Now it's time to hear from you. What was your favorite Montgomery Clift movie? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.